Welcome to Convergence.fm. I'm your host, Ashok Shivanand.
Culture may not be intentional, but good culture is always intentional. And I think there are different types of good culture, but it's always intentional. It's not left to crowdsourcing in a way, which is a disastrous recipe.
On the show, we explore how purpose-driven leaders align their culture, operations, and experimentation to de-risk the decisions that really matter and lead AI-enabled businesses with clarity. Convergence.fm. Transform from the inside out. When you hear someone talk about company culture, you can usually tell within the first 30 or so seconds whether they've sort of scrolled the social media reels and picked up little sound bites about culture, or whether they've actually had to do the hard work that comes with identifying and defining their culture, and then had to make the hard decisions and the trade-offs that are needed to foster and grow that culture with discipline. Our guest today is Maya Hari. And when I first heard Maya speak at a conference earlier this year, it was super evident from the get-go that she had done the work, both personally as well as for and with the teams that she's led at some of the world's most recognizable companies. She's been at Google, Samsung, and Microsoft. And at Twitter, she led the Asia Pacific region for the company and then went on to lead global strategy. Today, our guest Maya serves on the boards of multiple public companies like Saint-Gobain. She's also a co-founder of Genie Health, which is an AI-powered health startup that's focused on helping people become the healthiest versions of themselves. But what stood out to me beyond her accolades and her resume is around how she thinks about leadership. Now, we come from similar backgrounds. We're both engineers by training, and we've both had to realize and learn that there isn't a fast-track formula to culture. We've all heard of how culture eats strategy for breakfast, and ultimately how it's one of the most strategic, high-leverage parts of business. But what I love from this episode is how Maya connects culture to what she calls the heart questions about purpose and the vulnerability that it takes to do it authentically and ultimately sustainably. On the episode, we get to talk about how Maya defines a great culture and how she actually measures it. And in her case, she interviews the boards before she takes on roles, so she has to do that. We talk about why purpose is the seed of culture and how culture is only ever good when it's intentional. She explains what she looks for when she surgically assembles a team and what makes someone a cultural glue. We also talk about vulnerability, not as a buzzword, but as something that unlocks value and creates trust. She shared how she evaluates CEOs as a board member in interviews, what emotional safety looks like in practice. And yes, we even get into crying at work. Spoiler, some leaders actually keep a cry count, and Maya has stories. If you're leading a big team through a big change, maybe a turnaround or a transformation, we also get into the difference between wartime and peacetime CEOs and the associated transformations, and some tests on how to figure out which one you might be and which type of transformation you're better wired for. Finally, at the end of the episode, I'll also share some thought exercises that we've used with CEOs and founders to help identify and align with their purpose, especially if you're not totally clear on what it is yet. It's a hard question for many of us, certainly for myself, but I promise these are simple, low-stake ways to start making progress on them. Here is the episode with Maya Hari. Subscribe to the podcast to get future episodes as soon as they're published. If you find this helpful, give the podcast a 5-star rating on your podcast app or hit that like button on YouTube. Well, thank you so much for making time to chat with us. When we first met, one of the things that really stood out to me was this real diversity of your experience across various continents and then across different types of companies, tech companies, non-tech companies, as well as various roles where you've kind of been in the operations, you've been a CEO, and then now you have a lot of board roles. And so I think one of the questions I have to start was what some of the biggest cultural differences were that you have observed as you grow up as a technologist and kind of the companies like Twitter where culture is very opinionated and we get to hear about it. And then there's, there's not the nicest words that sometimes come up when it comes to culture, things like stodgy, you picture cubicles when they're more traditional enterprises. And I think I've personally learned that it's not about having ping pong tables and open office, and there's a lot more to culture. So I'm curious to know what your perspective is around the differences between them and what you tend to aim towards as you build new things.
Yeah, I mean, what culture is not about ping pong tables and not about free lunch? Come on, you're breaking so many people's dreams right now. But
Breaking the
uh,
budget.
and breaking budget. No, I'd say culture is really for me. It's been amazing to see companies that are young, native, tech, high growth, but also in wearing my board director hat seeing non-technology companies, very brick and mortar companies that are built on very different cultures, not bad, not great, not good, but like just different, right? It's a and hierarchy plays a bigger role there. Structured process plays a bigger role there. Experimentation less so, and so I think it really is an interesting journey through professional life to observe cultures and to appreciate different types of cultures, both tech and non-tech. And I've really had the privilege of doing that. I'd say what makes a culture is really about for me, the outputs are this. Do people enjoy being associated with the company and why? The second is how are decisions made in the company and do they essentially optimize to effectiveness? And is everybody clear about their role and about why and how companies make decisions. If you boil it down, I think these are the output metrics that I look at to say, is the culture good or is the culture not, right? And it's these three combinations. It's both, I'd say it's both soft skills of how you make people feel, but it's also hard skills around what is the decision making criteria and effectiveness there.
Yeah, and I think every company has a culture. Some are intentional and others are maybe subconscious, and you're leaving it up to your team's best morality to figure out those three questions. Because anytime you start reading down culture, I think, it's some variation of those three topics that you brought up there. So maybe let's dive into those one by one, right?
Yeah.
And the first one's maybe the softest and easiest to confuse or feel ambiguous around, do people enjoy feeling associated with the company and why? So maybe talk us through examples that come to mind of, the good side and maybe the not so good side and what you tend to aspire for or what you advise the CEOs when you're on a board.
Yeah. Listen, I always believe culture may not be intentional, but good culture is always intentional. And I think there are different types of good culture, but it's always intentional. It's not left to crowdsourcing in a way, which is a disastrous recipe. If you ever crowdsource from top management, the culture. But let's talk about what's a good example of how you make people feel. I think there are companies I've seen, and I'll give you an example of Twitter, where I worked and spent nearly 8 years of my career, and I'll talk about a real world company that I sit on the board of. I won't name them, but I'll describe the culture. Both are really great cultures, very different origin stories, and my description of how I felt when I joined Twitter was like I had found home. And I've never ever said that about any other company in terms of culture, even though I've enjoyed working for many other companies, but I found home at Twitter. And that is something, it was the pride of what the company stood for, the purpose, how the company actually demonstrated its values in good days and in bad days. And did I feel proud of that? Did I agree with everything every single day? No. But did I know that we could debate it and we could try to understand it better and enjoyed the process of being there and have the clarity of it? Yes. There was also this huge element of I loved the people I worked with. There was this ability to sort of attract people who both loved the purpose of the company, but also were just nice people, and not just nice for the sake of being nice. They were also interesting people. They brought different points of view, they had different passions and interests. And I felt if I'm spending, I don't know, 10, 12, 14 hours a day ever on a work day with this group of people, I came back enriched more than just giving to the job. I got a lot out of it too. Maybe a great conversation about something unrelated to work, but it enriched my life. So to me, that's one descriptor of a type of good culture. Not perfect, I would say, but good. Um, Another culture I want to describe, very different industry, traditional manufacturing industry. People love working for this company. To me, the recipe there is also somewhat similar in that there's a deep purpose to this company and what they do. They're democratizing the products that they're manufacturing, making it affordable to many people around the world. They have a deep scientific backing. A founder who many decades ago had focused his entire effort on really doing good for the world and doing that through science and through manufacturing. And people spend decades of their time in this company and talk so fondly about this intimacy they feel with the company and the leader and the founder and the founding team. So I think there's something there that these are the outcomes of good culture. Very different industries, very different dynamism. Twitter is far more open, young, meritocratic. The other one, by nature of the industry, is very different, but good cultures all the same.
So I think the common thread or the common word even I heard in both of these cases of companies in very different industries and have very different operating models is the word purpose. And I know I'm guilty of this myself. I've either not spent enough time articulating this, or on the other hand, I've spent way too much time and overcomplicated it. And so I'm curious, when it comes to purpose, my guess is that everyone who did the wild thing of starting a company or something really audacious had more than a driving force than the profit around it. And maybe not everyone is aware or maybe even comfortable enough to look within and say it to themselves, let alone to their team. That's my personal philosophy. I'm curious to know from your perspective, these wildly different companies, purpose is the common theme. What's a good way to get started in terms of driving that as part of your culture and articulating it?
I think the misnomer is that purpose can be, bring your leadership team together in a room and think about the purpose. It's not a head question. It's actually a deep heart question. Like, why did the company come to be in the first place? There was a reason. There is a reason very often. It's very evocative. It's not, it doesn't always have to be altruistic, right? I've heard a young woman talk about how she started up a Stitch Fix type company purely because she felt like women love having pockets in their outfits and they just clothes are never brought together. But the passion with which that came out, I kid you not, it's a true story. But it is purpose because it's an underserved audience. It's a aha moment, and people weren't making clothes like that. So it's not always altruistic purpose, but there's purpose, and those stories are incredibly unifying to others who see the world in similar light, and it unites, right? And very often people get self drawn to and they self select into a company where purpose resonates. I'm very unlikely to go work for a company where the purpose is totally opposite to what I sort of get out of bed and enjoy doing. So I think it's incredibly powerful, but the misnomer for me is always purpose does not, you can't manufacture purpose with the leadership team coming together intellectually. Purpose comes from here. And and it's a question of, can you identify it? Can you unlock it? And can you sometimes be vulnerable enough to wear it on your sleeve as a leader? And if you can, to me, that's the seed of culture. Like, you really start to think about, how do you do everything in service of this purpose? What's that North Star, and how do you do it? And then you start to put pieces together behind it. That to me is hugely powerful, but that's deep. Huh? It's not like uh, let's put a PowerPoint together and think about what purpose is. And by the way, purpose also, like, it doesn't have to always be altruistic. It doesn't at all have to be at odds with making money. And actually, my entire life belief professionally is that it should never be at odds with making money, because the whole idea is, I think a lot about, how do you be ambitious about purpose, and how do you be ambitious about profit. And if you can find a way to marry those two things, it's incredibly powerful. The rest of it comes easier. Building culture around it, hiring the right teams that believe the same way in that purpose is actually comes. It starts to flow.
I love that. And there's a few myth busters that you did there, and I want to make sure to point them out. The first one is that purpose doesn't have to be altruistic. And I very much agree with you there. I think I've sat down and modeled this out myself. There were certain causes that were really close to me. And after I had a certain amount of success, I thought about how we can, I wanted to change my career completely. And I realized that if I stayed on the profit path, I would have way more influence and resources and a network that I could bring towards, in this case, helping underrepresented folks here in Detroit learn how to write code. Then, if I spent all my time on it, where all the resources would be limited to what I had and not a more expansive approach to think about it. So, I very much agree with that, and I think that's something that holds people back. There's sometimes a guilt about making money when, if you're doing good work and if it's purposeful work, then you have options now in terms of how you vote with that money in terms of what change you want to drive. The second thing I think is that, on that note, I love this Stitch Fix for pockets, and there is something about just creating human delight, right? And something it's a meme, right? There's a meme of the girl that's saying it has pockets,
Yes.
and so it's the fact
It's
that you and I
grounded in
have seen
truth.
it is not only that, but I think such deep truth that someone who's not a girl that has never had to deal with this knows about this meme, and so it's kind of gone that level of mainstream. So I think from now I'm going to check any private investments I make, and maybe we can start a fund together that are specifically based on memes to
I love
see
it.
how far spread this delight or this emotional concept is.
I love it. We're doing very specific social media listening for memes and tying it to investment sentiment. I mean, hedge funds have done this all the time, not for memes, but generally in social media. Why shouldn't we do it for memes?
Yeah, maybe
I'm in.
we'll edit this part out before before we go make our purpose meme driven profits. You mentioned something there that I want to clarify. There were two words that can seem in contention, and I have a hunch that you have a through line. And one of them was around hierarchy. And I'm going to make an assumption that that's something we're trying to move away from, generally speaking, regardless of the type of organization. Even like the military is trying to kind of decentralize their decision making to the troops in the specific specific sites. And then on the other side, you said crowdsourcing is something we want to kind of also avoid. And those things seem like there's some level of clarity I think I need in terms of how do we make it a non-hierarchical approach and maybe a collaborative, contributive approach to the culture, and also avoid this like the crowdsourcing piece.
Hierarchy is not a bad thing for kind of a process to be followed, for predictability around things, but it actually is hard if it steeps into culture to a point where you don't necessarily have the benefit of hearing from or celebrating an idea that came from an unexpected place in the hierarchy. And this, I think, is something that tech companies, going back to sort of where my roots have come from professionally, have done a really good job of making democratizing the voice of every employee in the company. And it has its roots in therefore kind of meritocratic idea seeking. If it's a good idea, if it's worth building, it doesn't matter where it came from. We should think about it, right? But if you actually take this to a manufacturing floor, you take it to a factory, you take it to a services company, you'll see that the same truth rings everywhere. The person that is at the vantage point of knowing or seeing something that is unexpected that someone way up in the hierarchy doesn't see is always interesting. A manufacturing floor person, employee, is going to be able to see things and therefore spot how something could change in the way a company does manufacturing. Or a services person in the delivery team might actually observe that the offering is not actually perfectly in tune with the customer's need. And so, of course, they're at the vantage point to have an idea that says, hey, something's wrong here, but I think we could do this differently. And you can have layers in a company, but do you have a culture that enables the rise of this voice consistently and codified in a fashion that actually does better things for the business? So to me, that it's less about the reporting hierarchy, but it's more about the cultural hierarchy. Is where do you celebrate the idea? So that brings me to the next point on what do you crowdsource versus what do you not crowdsource. And I think things that are ideas that are inputs into the business, you should crowdsource to the extent that you should listen to good opinion elsewhere. But you cannot kind of do collaborative decision making. And what I mean by that, you should collaborate, but you should have a clear view on how you make decisions and why you make decisions. And that should be shared knowledge in a company. If you do consensus based decision making, that's a recipe to disaster, right? It's because, the more you want to have diverse opinions at the table, but the more diverse opinions you have, it's counterproductive to actually trying to get consensus based decision making done. So I think that's where I draw the line between why it's so important that how decisions are made is such a really key piece in a company. But at the same time, non-hierarchical allows for opinions that matter to rise up.
And something that it reminds me of is in the design thinking world, we're wanting to start with quantity over quality when it comes to ideas,
Yeah.
right? And we call it divergent thinking amongst the nerds there. And this voice that you speak of that spans hierarchy certainly has a major place when you're looking for more ideas. Now, I think, or more dots to connect. And then I think some of the kind of work of leadership really is the decision making and the prioritization and focus of which of these many problems do we solve? Or someone shared an idea with me, let me sit with them and distill, like, hey, what problem does it solve? Thank you for the solution. And now you have both sides of weighing out, like, hey, if we solve this, how big of an impact is it? And having to kind of prioritize and focus everyone else to the limited set of things as much as you have a voice to everyone is something that comes to mind. Another thing around that I remembered about when you talked about process is I think certainly it helps with the structure and sense of predictability. And I intentionally say sense of because it's not necessarily the case. And something that I remember there is that whenever, even at Integral, when someone would come in and they were following a process and I realized that they didn't know why that process was in place, that was where something that had good intentions had the leakage into, call it a bureaucracy.
Yeah.
And then, I'm going to maybe take a leap here since I have a hunch that you and I are from similar parts of India. And it eventually becomes superstition, right? Of the different things that our parents teach us. And we wonder as kids why. I think as I grow older and mentoring kids myself, I realized that there's providing without providing context, we're just kind of telling the kid to do the thing that our parents told us. And my hunch is that our ancestors had a reason for it. They just forgot to kind of pass down the why. They just, passed down the what. You mentioned vulnerable a couple of times here. Once
Yeah.
on the purpose side, and then the other one was with this, with inviting the voice from everyone from the manufacturing floor up, and then having to transparently make these decisions around the input that's provided. It's something that is thankfully becoming um, a little bit more sort of accepted or even sought after amongst leaders. And I think there's still, as much as people want to get to the other side of being a more vulnerable leader, what's the first step to take? And I have a hunch that in your board roles, you're probably sitting alongside CEOs that you're nudging along the way, and that you're probably that voice in the room there. And I'm curious what some of those conversations have looked like, and which ones may have worked better than others for leaders out there that are trying to bring a more heartfelt, vulnerable leadership style.
Listen, vulnerability is it's true we talk a lot about it, a lot more about it now than in the past. We even say we value it, but it's so hard to do. It's like it's an irony in a way. We teach our leaders to really be strong, made of really strong stuff, because uh, leaders have to take a lot of good things and tough things in their day-to-day work. And part of becoming strong also hardens you a little bit. And what we're saying is, no, but actually, I want to see all your emotion, and I want to see, when you're having a hard day. And these things are, it's a very nuanced companion set of emotions we're asking out of our leaders. But actually, it's incredibly powerful, incredibly important as well for the leader. I think that the minute you're able to show vulnerability, you can actually access a level of honesty around the table, even from people that you work with, to break down the barriers a little bit and have fairly transparent, open conversations on what's going well and what's not. And if I look at some of the board conversations, the boards that I think that I've had the privilege of being a part of that are doing well, or where I value the time that each of us spends on it, is when you can be vulnerable and talk as much openly about what's not going well as you can about what's going well. And that's a really important piece, not just for, in the case of my boards, it builds so much confidence and trust in the CEOs of these companies for the board to say, I don't doubt that you would be transparent. You're transparent now. It gives me a signal that you would always be transparent about things. But on another side, it actually is incredibly liberating for a CEO to be vulnerable, because you don't have to carry that burden on your shoulders all the time. You can actually have a release. You can actually be able to express truly where things might be tough. People who, your colleagues who in the management team, who you may not have you may not have expected to shoulder more burden than that you thought they would actually step in and help out. But also it makes you stay in the job longer, I think. It prevents burnout. So in a way, it's all in all something that is a very, very precious characteristic and a trait. But I would say, Ashok, that I don't yet see the say-do ratio on vulnerability truly at where it should be. And it's not a judgment. It's hard. Huh? This is a very personal thing to be
Mm-hmm.
vulnerable. So it's not like I tell a CEO and they turn it on today or they turn it off. It's a journey in a way, and it's human growth that has to happen to get there. But it's just such an important piece of leadership for me.
I would tend to agree. There's the vulnerability is very closely tied to authenticity, and there's an energy that we consume anytime that we're not being authentic. And I'm not a doctor here, but I have a hunch that the more we have to pretend to be someone when we go into work, the faster we're going to get to burnout, which is a form of de-energy. And I think as we try to tackle or figure out what the right boundaries are, or even figure ourselves out, maybe there's hard and fast rights and wrongs that are in the edges of the bell curve. And on the one side, I'd say there, I forget who it is or what happened, but I think it was during the tech layoff season a couple of years ago. There was a CEO who posted a video of himself crying about a layoff he had to do. And I think the reaction was not surprising, maybe to him, but maybe not to me. That vulnerability, that may not have been vulnerability, and that might have been a little bit more intentional. Compared to, I'll concede that on more than one occasion, I have had tears. It was in a more private setting, and it was when something was deeply important, or it was around a deeply important topic. And it was generally around people that I felt really safe with.
Mhm.
And it ended up sort of bonding myself to the room, to each other, I'll say, including
Yeah.
myself, and to whatever we were discussing. And I'm curious to know, this is a sensitive, maybe stigmatized topic, and I'm curious to know what your opinions and coaching might be on that.
Listen, I think you hit the nail on the head. There's two or three things. One is being vulnerable comes in many shades, but I'd almost say having tears in your eyes is kind of that that moments where you've been so moved, or you are in a place where you're so vulnerable that you have a shared bond with whoever you are in that room with. And I can tell you, and I talk about this to a number of other women leaders very often, and apparently if you and I are talking about it, it's definitely not gender specific, right? But I remember exactly the moments like that have happened in my career. So the term cry count, if we want to give it that, I've actually cried 3 times in very big, important meetings.
Oh, you win.
No, it's
I
that's not the
don't think.
point at all. No, that's not the point. That's totally
That's
besides
right.
the point. But but I remember it, and I think I'm half ashamed of having cried in a very important big meeting, which I shouldn't be. But I remember that it actually did bond us. And it also told me, is there room for me to be vulnerable, or is there not room for me to be vulnerable? And to me, that is psychological safety, either being built or strengthened in that moment. And it doesn't mean that every meeting has to be a crying meeting, because that would be really counterproductive emotionally and professionally. But if there is something that moved us that much, it there should be room for it, right? And I'll tell you another story. There was when I was at Twitter, there was a very big town hall where we were tackling a large challenge that was affecting the company globally. And one of the leaders in the company actually cried, and cried to show that he cared enough that we needed to fix whatever we were fixing at that point. And it was, talk about not just a vulnerability moment in a private setting in a room, but this was the company's town hall. Also, another very powerful moment of vulnerability. It just shows if what we care about, what we truly deeply care about as leaders, and that's a powerful currency. I wouldn't say the posting that on social media is authentic, or that's not the whole point, but I think people do go through emotional elements, and letting other people in is a very powerful way. These are the people that will remember it, stay loyal to you, feel safe to be able to be vulnerable back with you. So it's a huge moment very often to show that kind of vulnerability.
And I feel like maybe on this maybe journey, if we can have a little ding in the universe of destigmatizing crying at work with boundaries, one of the pieces I think is that you felt a little shame. In my case, I was trying to remember both occasions. I feel lucky that in one case it was a one-to-one, and the other gentleman and we both had tears in our eyes because we had a very honest discussion about something that maybe was overdue and neither of us had fully acknowledged. And it both felt good, and we both felt like we had a spectrum of outcomes that might have come out of that meeting, and we ended up being way better than what either of us had thought, because we, like, the vulnerability, the honesty, the authenticity just led to more options on the table for us to solve from. And we hugged it out, right? And
Oh,
then incidentally, this was someone that, we had, he was the person that was pretty influential in terms of boundaries around our culture. And we kind of had this discussion around like hugging at work. And, we started with a absolutely no hugging to a, hey, hugging is okay, but there's a role power associated. And it's complicated, but like, the short of it is like as a CEO, I never initiated one, but I would happily kind of reciprocate. And I think like there is a gender role power as well. And we got into some nuances there. And then for the two of us to do it was a great moment where I feel mostly pride and not
Yeah.
as much shame as a result. And I think it's because of the how the kind of, I don't know, aftercare seems like maybe a spicy word to use here, but
Yeah. Yeah.
uh, how we kind of responded to it. And then in the
Yeah.
other case was more in a very strategic, like we followed EOS, and this was an EOS quarterly, and I had to dig deep to answer one of my colleagues on the leadership team's question about the reason for why we were working on certain things on our 10-year target. And it was very deeply personal, something that had been specific to me since when I was a teenager. And as I unlocked that memory, there were tears that came along with when I was answering his question. And then there was our head of product. After the wave of emotion had kind of swept through, and everyone kind of, the energy in the room had changed in retrospect for the positive, but I didn't know. And she kind of like held her hand out from the other side of the table. She's like, let's dap it up. And there was something about that made me feel like it was okay what I did,
Yeah.
and it was accepted, it was welcome, it was helpful. And then we had like a lot of clarity in terms of where we were headed and what kind of things we were going to prioritize, what kind of things were distractions and everything else. So those were
Yeah.
that's kind of my potentially long-winded stories. And I'm curious,
No, it.
what's the advice on how to respond to emotion? Because I think this is again gendered, but sometimes as men, if there was a woman that cried during a meeting that we had, there is a discomfort on both sides of not knowing what the right thing to do is, and then there's shame on their end and wanting to leave when there's got to be a better outcome. So,
Yeah.
what's your take?
I think the first and foremost is if a moment like that, a moment of vulnerability, is a sign of is the space trusted? Is there psychological safety? Then the the need of the hour for a leader or a colleague is to make sure that that psychological safety and trust is preserved. If you do nothing else, it may be awkward, the reaction, whether you're a hugger or not a hugger, do you hand tissue or do you hug? Oh, those are different. Those are all immaterial to me, but it's deep inside if there is a signal that there's permission for the trust and safety to continue, that's as best as you can manage. And also, I always believe we're all humans, we're fallible, we sometimes make mistakes on how we react to certain things, but as long as you can hold the principle of trust and psychological safety, the awkwardness gets better the next time around, right? And so I kind of average out my three vulnerable kind of meetings where I cried and say, did I get better at handling myself on the third one versus the first one? Right. And give yourself permission to be that way. But the larger point I'll say, Ashok, is that today when I sit on a number of different boards and I contribute on a lot of committees, including kind of nomination committees that often oversees kind of the selection of CEOs and leaders into the company. Vulnerability is something I actively look for because it's a very deep signal on building trust, building loyalty in a company, building good culture because there's openness to different kinds of moments that allow for these sort of things. So I'd say it's a
Hmm.
meta quality in a leader that signals high probability of success across a number of dimensions that are desirable in a CEO or a leader. So I think that's sort of the bigger piece where it all ladders to. That vulnerability goes hand in hand with probability of openness, probability of inclusion, ability to kind of accept other opinions different from yours. So it actually ladders really well into other qualities. So that's why I think it's so useful for people to actually do the work sometimes to open themselves up to be vulnerable.
And I love that it's something you look for. And I'm curious now, if you were to look back at different tells or signals, what might those be? Or looking forward, the next maybe board interview conversation you were having, and you were looking to see if it's a fit. What are some things that maybe you've kind of codified a little bit even?
So I actually look very much for people who are comfortable talking about who they are more than just what they do or what they've done. And this goes a little bit deeper into kind of I really value people who have a good understanding of their own identity versus their job title and their demonstrable achievements. Both are important, but I think that to me is one tell that I look for. Let me give you an example. A person that is able to, and a true story, a person that tells me and told me so much about their sort of achievements, company by company by company, versus someone who actually told me about what drives them and how they are a mountaineer and they've done amazing things, or how they've actually quit in the middle of their career from a really important position and went to take care of their family because this was something they needed to do. But the way they actually tell the story tells me, are they comfortable in their skin? Are they able to kind of talk about who they are in entirety comfortably versus not? Right. So I think these are the things that I look for particularly. And I think the richer the story on identity, the better it is. If you ask me to define my identity, I'll tell you that it used to be very much in the early part of my career, my job title. Today, if you ask me, it's not just my job title, it's the fact that I am a passionate artist, even if not a good one. And I am an obsessive urban farmer. But I have told you that there is a lot more than how I see myself than just my job title, and that is something that's a very good leading indicator to work done within yourself to know. Therefore, are you able to open yourself up to other things? But it's not the only indicator of vulnerability, but it's one. The second I'd say is people who are able to talk about their failures as much as their successes. Because failure is certainly an acceptance of failure comes hand in hand with vulnerability. Because you know you're fallible and you know you've sort of had tough moments, it makes you a lot more open to vulnerability. And if you're able to talk about it, that's vulnerability. Um, and most times in an interview, you only want to say good things about yourself. But if you have the confidence to say the tough things, that's actually huge. The last thing I would say is that if you're actually able to show emotion, which sometimes it happens in an interview and sometimes it doesn't, right? And that sometimes it needs time. So it's not a deal breaker for me, but these are kind of three layers of things that I look for in vulnerability when talking to a CEO.
Hopefully there isn't a CEO that just goes and tries to like life hack that and publishes that on Twitter now. Fostering an engaged product organization and aligning them with the principles around lean, human-centered design, and agile will more than likely lead to successful business outcomes for your organization. But getting started or getting unblocked can be hard. This podcast is brought to you by the player coaches over at Integral. They help ambitious companies like you build amazing product teams and ship products in artificial intelligence, cloud, web, and mobile. Listeners to the podcast can head on over to integral.io/convergence and get a free product success lab. During this session, the Integral team will facilitate a problem-solving exercise that gives you clarity and confidence to solve a product, design, or engineering problem. That's integral.io/convergence. Now, back to the show. One thing that I'm very curious about, a part of the industry that I am really curious about is turnaround. Now, turnaround can be a bad word. When you hear about private equity coming in, slashing jobs, and there's a meme about that too. On the other hand, there are also, I know for a fact, like someone who maybe took over a business from their parent and wanted to be more intentional about the culture and had to start driving change, and they knew where they wanted to get to because they had gotten to work at like a consumer internet giant like Twitter, and they wanted to turn this manufacturing company culture into there. It could be a CEO that was newly hired into an organization, and they inherit a lot of the culture debt from the previous leader, and it's hard to know how to get started on this giant process, and it takes a long time. So it's hard to know if you're on the right track. And in your board seat, I imagine you get to kind of see snapshots and more of a time lapse version of this. And so I'm curious, what is the advice, or what are some of the stories you've seen in terms of where this transformation work has gone really well? Or I'll take counter examples too of the
Yeah,
don't do's.
there are leaders who are good at taking businesses and hyper growing them. So there are leaders who are great for growth. There are leaders who are great for turnarounds. Very often, I don't see a perfect overlap between the two. Although I have seen a few who can be great leaders in both scenarios. But I think the reason I say this, so I sort of call them the peacetime CEOs versus the wartime CEOs. This is my archetype, if you will. I think the wartime CEOs could be kind of coming in at a moment where things are just very mediocre and just sort of humming along, 1 or 2% growth rate, kind of just barely profitable, but on the right side of it, and nothing amazing about the business or nothing hugely, different now versus the last decade. I see a lot of those. Um, and the family business type scenarios that you describe, I've seen a few of those. Uh, the other side of it is I've seen things just like great company, very interesting offering, but suddenly hit a bad patch based on bad decisions and is now kind of digging itself out of the hole. And I think those are two different types of transformations. Very important to know the difference between these two because I think it takes very different temperament and time frame to take something that's business as usual but flat, but really start to put investments in for the next 5 years that will start to change the trajectory of talent, product, capability. It's a very, very methodical, patient, but very committed to a vision structure for that scenario. Absolutely can be done, needs vision, starts from someone having vision and passion, and then layering it with capability, and then having the patience to see it out, and being smart about the capital you need for it, the talent you need for it, the how behind it. But I think that's one side of it. The taking a tough situation and turning it around, that's where I think it can be quite binary, where I've seen it go spectacularly well and I've seen it go really bad as well, right? And that's where I would sort of say it takes a wartime CEO that comes in and can be the bad person in the room when needed, be the tough person in the room, be open, honest, but brutal about it sometimes in order to arrest the challenges immediately. Maybe the company is bleeding money, maybe the company is losing talent hand over fist, unable to kind of uh, unable to get retention kind of stabilized. It could be any one of those scenarios that I've seen. And it just needs people to take very tough calls to do changes or cuts or turnarounds that are deeper than you think you need now, but you do it once and for all, and then you sort of just hold fort and get people hopefully quickly to a point where they can start breathing again and they can start looking forward to growing teams, revenue, profitability, whatever that might be, right? Very different temperaments, actually. And I feel like that second temperament of turning a bad situation around, that is something that I don't see everybody doing. And so it really needs someone who can be that who can be the bad cop in the room and can just do it with intensity and time bound nature. Um, But not often do I find this kind of wartime, peacetime CEOs coming together. And, I can be peacetime now and I can be great for wartime too. But I see more of an overlap between peacetime and transformational CEOs. The steady growth, but not growing massively. That change can actually come from a peacetime CEO too. So that's sort of the archetypes I have seen.
And I'm going to put you on the spot here. If there's a listener who's wondering which of those two they are, and they both come with discomfort. One is, a lot more urgent and is going to come across way more uncomfortable. Neither has to violate sort of kindness or how you treat each other. And it's not an excuse whether you're in wartime or peacetime for violating kind of core values that way. But nevertheless, I'm curious if there's problems people have solved or approaches people have had before that you might be able to help them resonate with if they're wondering which they are, or anything you use for hiring CEOs when on your board roles.
I think if you ask your question what you really enjoy and when you've been in flow state as a leader, you'll know the
Mm,
answer to that question, to be honest. I have seen a leader who's been an amazing wartime CEO. And I've worked with him and it's been amazing. I credit him for the turnaround of the company that I was a part of. But I don't know that I can be him. Um, if I really ask myself, when did I enjoy the happiest moments of my own leadership have been when I've been able to steady the ship in hypergrowth mode. Because hypergrowth comes with its own problems. You've not hired fast enough. You have customers, your product's not going fast enough. So you have, it's not always just, perfect, swimmingly happy kind of
hmm
scenarios. But I can solve those problems easier, and I'm in more flow state solving those problems than kind of taking a bad situation and turn around. So if I ask myself that question, I know the answer to that question. So I would say for listeners, you know the answer to it. You just have to think back to all the moments that you have been just perfectly in sync as a leader, and you know which ones they are.
Now, what a powerful answer. So humble too, in letting everyone know that we know the answer better than you do.
It's the truth.
So you're back into entrepreneur mode too now. And so why don't you tell us a little bit about the next venture that you're also doing?
Yeah, so I sit on a number of boards. I do a bunch of investing, and this year went back into founding a new company with two other co-founders, who it's an amazing sort of dream come true being able to co-found Genie is the name of the company. It's a health AI company that we're building together. Very young, very new, and the three of us have been friends, deep friends for a long time. We know each other, and we thought, we really, as technologists, we wanted to come and build a company in a new format, in a new way, in the age of AI, but actually putting something that we deeply care about, which is empowering the consumer, and bringing agency to the consumer as far as helping them be the healthiest version of themselves. So health is the area we chose. It says a little bit about us. I think we love complex puzzles and problems and industries where there's ability to disrupt and bring fresh thinking into the mix. And there's a real opportunity with consumerizing the health industry, as we go. So that's our new venture, and the focus is really on being able to allow consumers to bring all of their data, their medical data, their lifestyle data, their behavioral data together in one place. Anything that can give us a clue or give themselves a clue of what might affect their health positively or negatively, and start to form kind of a personalized N equals one journey of how to build and maximize their potential health for their health span. So that's the goal. We'll see if we succeed, but it's an exciting problem to be tackling, and especially to do it with a few co-founders who we really enjoy working together with.
If the innovators, the people are already trying to solve this problem or a signal of validation, I think you're definitely playing in a space where a bunch of folks had wished someone else had just solved it for them, instead of myself having to pull my blood work and my like wearable data and everything all into one place and then put it into just a generic LLM instead of something that maybe is a little bit more specialized. So I am
Exactly.
excited to hear the journey and hopefully get to use the product soon.
Yeah.
I am curious. I'm sure a lot of folks are have crossed this bridge, maybe had success, maybe failure around working with close friends and family, especially co-founding, and what kind of structures and boundaries and stuff come into place so that we can, have fun together, but also protect the relationships.
Yeah, you're definitely not the first person who raised that the minute I said I'm co-founding with, and I have to tell you, one of the deep friends is also my husband. So if you can imagine, before we and all I got was commiserations for our marriage. So glad we have a third co-founder who is a friend and therefore can be marriage counselor as soon as needed. But no, to be honest, it's quite an amazing thing to have people who you deeply trust, and so being able to be co-founders, you can really maximize what each of us brings to the table without having to worry too much in the early days about process or roles and responsibilities. We do have roles and responsibilities for sure, but it's just easier getting going in that first cycle. So, which is really nice. But I think we put guardrails before we even registered the company. To be honest, we had conflict resolution principles, and we know that we value our personal relationship tremendously, and so we would put that above the company at all times. So if God forbid we're in a scenario where we so deeply disagree with each other on how to build the company, we have a blueprint on what we will do. So I'm hoping not to have to pull that out, but it's good governance. It's good practice because people have had challenges around these areas before. So,
Definitely. Well, there's a few questions that I like to ask all the guests. And as we wrap up, the first one is around teams. A lot of the listeners come here to hear more about fostering engaged teams and building delightful products. And from a team standpoint, I'm curious, is there a especially inspiring team that you look back on as a guiding light as you're building a new team or you're coaching a CEO on fostering their team? And this doesn't have to be a, a real team or one that you've been on. It can be a fictional team too.
yeah, listen, there is one team, the minute you say dream team, there's one team that I think of. And it's actually a team that I got to build from scratch when I first joined Twitter. And it was a team that we put together from many, many countries around the world. Um, it was just such a team where the people were great. We had so much fun together. We contributed to the business in a really positive light. But there are some fun things. I have to say, the one thing about this question is that I don't think every person has many, many, many teams they think about and say, oh, there were 5 teams that were amazing in my career. Whenever I ask people the same question that you asked me, Ashok, it's either 1 or 2 teams that people have been a part of, typically, that have been these dream teams. And it's so hard to come across them. And when you have them, it's worth holding on to as long as you can and cherish it. But the things that I really enjoyed about this team I told you about, we had a name as a team. We had swag for our team, and it's all about these are cute ways of kind of establishing identity. I think as a
Mm-hmm.
team, we're enjoying working with each other so much. How do we codify it? How do we capture it in a name, in an identity, in an expression? And we had so many people around the company who wanted to come be a part of that team. And it goes to show that it's infectious to have a great team, and you don't always get it. And so when any of us have it, it's worth holding on to. And when I look at large companies around the world, and to me, team and company, it's a bigger version of that same microcosm. It's the culture. It's we come right back to that question about what makes amazing culture. And magical teams often have that kind of culture.
You mentioned that a lot of people say just one or two. And, having asked this to so many guests now, and I ask it to not just guests, as folks that I get to kind of interact with as well. It's something I'm just really curious of. The truth is, I think over time I can tell that the sad truth is that a majority of folks' answer is actually zero.
Really?
Um, Yep. And in my
Okay.
case, I remember the team, and we have matching shoes. Like Nike allows
Yeah.
you to make custom sneakers, and we had
Yeah.
a little like everyone designed two different ones, and we all voted on it. And like we have
Yeah.
our this pair of shoes that I'm never going to throw away,
Yeah.
and
Like,
um, getting to feel it and sense that things were just right and anything could be conquered is just such a magical feeling that I think, given the overwhelming majority of folks have not gotten to experience this, my advice to folks out there is that if even if you have to take a little bit of a pay cut, even if you have to maybe drive a little bit longer or take some kind of short-term compromise, it is super worth it in the long term for your personal journey, your leadership journey, to get to just be part of a dream team and get to experience it, because the it's so deeply rooted into your emotions and nervous system and everything else that the next time around, I can kind of see it coming around the corner of what might be compromising building this next team that's going to work. And yeah, I think it's unfortunate that not the majority haven't at least gotten one. I do have a follow up to that, and since you said you got to kind of form this team, I'm curious. Uh, I imagine you might have had to be a little bit surgical and intentional around putting the right folks together, various folks maybe that were equally technically qualified, and which one kind of got to be part of this team. And then when others wanted to be part of it, maybe you had to kind of have like some level of generous exclusion, I think it's called, of who gets to be part of it and who doesn't. So what was that all like?
I think the intentionality of hiring the right first people into the team is very important. I think the minute you get the first two or three, when you're building a team from scratch, when you get the first two or three right, it sets the cadence for then who this group co-opts in from there on. So I think it's so important to get first one, two, three right. And I think that's where I leaned in to put a lot of effort into that world. And there it's a combination of kind of getting the right technical skills or the right expertise on the team, so that you have good, solid groundwork. But also getting people who are glues culturally, who are like glue culturally, and that's a very underrated skill. You might get both of those things in the same person, where you have someone who's excellent at their job and excellent as a cultural glue, but sometimes you may get it in varying shades. But it's really worth thinking about kind of one of those three people being the glue at least, and then having really strong technical foundation or expertise on the team. From there on, I think you can imagine that a group that it feels proud of being who they are then co-opts accordingly, and then the goodness spreads in a way. Not without guardrails. You want to think about cultural fit and are they the right first representative in a country on the team, etc. Um, but then I don't underestimate the effort you put in to keep the team, to gel the team. The amount of time spent having fun together, working on things, helping each other out, the team helping each other out, working on achieving something, create some magical moments. And then building identity as a team. I cannot tell you, like you guys voted for shoes. We waited for months and voted on a hashtag name for the team. And then we printed t-shirts, and then of course the rest is history. Everybody wanted the t-shirt and the hashtag, and you sort of become this fabled team around the world that everybody wants to be a part of. So I think that's those are kind of interesting moments. When we appointed leaders on the team, there was this moment of curated moment of appointing two leaders parallelly and creating a surprise moment with champagne to celebrate the fact that they had graduated to that leadership role.
Mm.
Um, that little effort goes a long way. I definitely remember it. I hope they remember it the same way. But we've been amazingly close, these people and I, over the years. And it tells me that it's worth making milestone moments really visible and meaningful to people as well.
And you mentioned cultural glue. And I think it reminds me of how people talk about product market fit, where it's a lot easier to tell that you've gotten there than necessarily defining it intellectually. And I'm curious, when you're interviewing for these roles, what did you find out about this person that told you that they might have a high propensity to be this cultural glue?
I first of all, I fully subscribe to the fact that you mostly only know after you've got there.
Mm,
But I would say that I put out intention to have this type of mix, which means that I remain open to people who are, well, you're not only interviewing for expertise in the skill, but you're also looking for, do you bring something different? It's like a je ne sais quoi. Like it is,
hmm
I can smell it, I can sense maybe it is, but I can't be sure that it is. So it's an instinct that you develop for these sort of things. It very often is people who bring different interests and look very different from a typical person that fits that skill set. Um, and it's not super scientific, by the way, this opinion I have, but it's kind of the way I have perceived it to be. It might be a guitarist on the team, or it might be someone who's a DJ. These are the kind of people I'm thinking of. I actually have visuals of these people who've been amazing clues, or someone who bakes a lot. And in a way, it's actually something that gives the team this extra identity and brings an activity together because that's an interesting skill they bring.
hmm
Um, but it's very much you only know after you get there, right? But I think it's about being open as a leader when you're building a team, that not everybody will look the same. And you do look for a little bit more than just expertise. And if you can get that, it's actually quite cool sometimes.
Another question that I have for all the guests is a recent product that you bought and unboxed, or a service or somewhere that you went that you got to experience that just completely delighted you.
I have to say, one that I talk about a lot with friends of mine is Shazam still. We
Yeah.
call it this amazing moment of like, hit the Shazam button and it's magic. And you know the song, and it's like you had this moment of delight. You're desperately wanting to know the song beforehand, and you have to write, you don't know what it is, and then when you find out, don't have to write it down somewhere. So I think it's an old product, but it still holds. It's been amazing listening to the founder of Shazam, um, earlier this year, and it was technically so difficult to build that product over many years, but listen, it still is magic for me.
I think we were at the same place when we got to
You
hear
are?
Chris
Yeah,
speak, and
yeah,
I had no idea that it even started out as a text-based service that you had to pay
yeah.
50 cents and you can make a phone call. And I feel like the original version was even more impressive than the version that went more mainstream by the time I found out about it. And then maybe a little bit more AI specific version of that question of you're seeing it being used on your boards. I'm sure you're in the throes of it at Genie, and I bet your kids are using it to do their homework too. And is there a particularly novel or creative way that you've heard about someone using AI recently?
Listen, there are so many niche, cool use cases I hear, but the thing that actually blows my mind, Ashok, is just how easy it has become to actually build product, just coding and
Hmm
data science work. It's just made it so accessible that the democratization of ideas is honestly, that's the core. There's a lot of debate around whether, automation at scale will play out, won't play out, will organizations resist it or not? But I can see zero resistance in people embracing coding with AI. Zero resistance. We're at Genie, we're actually seeing once you get to clarity of thought of what you want to build, 80% of code now being written with AI. That's phenomenal. That to me trumps the novelty of any other use case, right? It's absolutely zero friction. I see people embracing it with absolutely no friction. That's that's the thing that I've been just marveling over.
It is truly magical, and I think it's gonna really democratize, like you said, access to creating value through software. Similar to, I always think about how the internet changed for artists and how Justin Bieber, for example, was found because of YouTube, and he didn't have to kiss the rings of all the folks along the way because he had something that people wanted, and everyone was able to find him through that medium. And I think, yeah, similarly here, vibe coding is gonna really allow people who are passionate about solving a problem
Yeah,
or bringing some kind of delight and working alongside their purpose to scale and not just kind
yeah,
of for themselves or people within arm's reach. I'm
it's
feeling
exciting.
so fired up and energized with all the clarity and the inspiration from here. If there are folks who are wanting to get a hold of you, what is the best way?
I'm on LinkedIn at Maya_Hari, and that's the best way. I'm also on X, and I'm in both these places, but LinkedIn's my go-to.
Awesome. Thank you so much for making time for us. I look forward to having you on soon.
Thanks so much. Lovely to chat, Ashok. Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed that chat as much as I did with Maya. One of the things that she said that really stuck with me was that purpose doesn't have to be altruistic. I'll admit, this gave me relief from attention and centered me back to thinking deeper around my purpose without that caveat around altruism, at least at first. Because the way that purpose had been defined for me, at least, made it really hard for me to introspect on. It felt like it had to be magnanimous and noble, look good on a slide deck, and it was really hard to make progress, though. In reality, I'm learning that it just has to be authentic, it has to be yours. And the other thing is that you just need to get started, and you can always iterate on the definition of your purpose as you try things and ultimately learn more about yourself. She also talked about being ambitious about both purpose and profit. And this has two benefits that I've noticed whenever I've lived with an alignment with both. The profits that you generate give you more capital that you can choose to deploy further in service of this purpose. It really feels more like a sustainable system that way. The other benefit, I think, is what I'd call emotional energy. I've found that whenever I've been working in service of something that really matters to me, that's when I find myself most energized. That's when time even feels different for me. I've had days where I've barely slept and I'm working on this stuff, and I still show up fired up and raring to go. On the flip side, I've also had days where I had everything on paper going well. Key hires are signing their acceptance letters, sales, revenue, profit, accolades from myself and the company. But when the work didn't align with what I connected deeply with, I'd walk away from those days feeling flat, even after 9 hours of sleep. The problem, though, is that defining one's purpose is extremely difficult for some of us. It certainly is for me. Now, I've gotten to spend a ton of time on this myself, and I've also gotten to test and improve it through the CEO workshops that we've been doing more recently. Believe it or not, we've even started with identifying purpose and ultimately defined artificial intelligence roadmaps for companies more than one occasion. And the process in all of those cases started with understanding what the entrepreneur's or co founder's purpose was and what change they really wanted to bring to the world. And then artificial intelligence and technology became ways to unlock opportunity for them to do it more feasibly than without this tech or AI. So, if you're someone who's had that little voice in your head, like I have, that's wondering if your work could feel more meaningful, more connected to something deeper, but you haven't quite figured out how to name it yet, I want to offer you a few of the prompts that have helped me and also helped a number of entrepreneurs that we've worked with on our workshops. You don't need to wait till you have a whiteboard or wait till that annual retreat that you keep dreaming of. You can do this right now, whether you're walking the dog or on your commute or you're waiting in the school pickup line. Ask yourself these questions in these prompts. And frankly, it's okay if the answers overlap with each other. We almost want that a little bit. And I recommend pausing this episode as you answer them. If you're an extrovert like myself, I'd even recommend answering these questions out loud, as much as you may sound a little silly, to really crystallize them. The first game we like to play is called That's BS. What's something in your neck of the universe that makes you say, that's bullshit? This is something that frustrates you around the systems around you. And you and your business may even be perpetuating the system today, but it just really gets you mad. And you wonder how it's come to be and what you can change about this. I'd take a few minutes now and pause this and think about them or talk them out loud. The second question is, when is a time you've gotten to work on something or even heard about someone else working on something that really had you feeling energized? Number 3, what problems around you that you'd be willing to put time into solving, even if you weren't getting paid for it, and you didn't know for sure whether it would work? Maybe it's a cause that you find yourself donating to, or perhaps even an investment you're making in a startup or some kind of company that's solving this problem, but you're not really expecting a return financially. It just makes you feel energized that you can support the folks that are solving this problem that you feel really deeply about. I think that's a signal, and purpose often hides in the trade-offs that we're secretly already willing to make. Now, we've also borrowed some prompts from an episode of Shed and Shine podcast, where Gino Wickman of EOS and Traction fame gives us some thought-provoking questions to help identify your purpose. The first question from the Shed and Shine podcast is, what are your 3 greatest successes? The second is, what are your 3 greatest failures? Now, I think that these prompts will have trends emerge that you can sense and feel, and it'll help answer the core question of what has life prepared you for? And that's the draft. And don't worry about getting it perfect. It's meant to be messy. And then I would do this. Commit to spending at least 1 hour a week, or maybe 1% of your company's profits towards something in service of this purpose. Nothing huge, just a small experiment. Think of it as a purpose pilot. Try it for a month and see how it feels. You can always come back to the drawing board and redefine how you talk about purpose as you learn more about yourself. And then you can go on to start aligning your team and a broader context around it. Once it starts to feel real, share it with people you trust. Maybe it's your leadership team. Maybe it's your spouse, and ask them how it lands. What surprised them? What might they iterate on it? You don't need to get it perfect before you share it. In fact, I think when you bring your team in early, it gives them space to shape it with you, and you learn a lot about what's already resonating with them. Because whether or not you've named your purpose, your team is already using their best moralities and making assumptions around it. And if it's not obvious, unfortunately, they're probably going to assume that it's all just about profit, which isn't the most energizing thing. And I know that's not the whole story. If that's all you cared about, you'd be somewhere else, not building what you're building. So share the draft, run an experiment, give your team permission to suggest ways the company could align more closely with that purpose. And try some of those ideas that come up. You'll know it's working when ideas start showing up in the hopper without you prompting your team for them, because they're kind of aligned and focused on that North Star that matters the most to you. And just like Maya said, vulnerability is going to be a huge part of it. Don't force it. Definitely do not fake it. But don't run from it either. I have seen personally moments where the CEO shared something super deeply personal with them and even choked up and teared up in front of his entire company. This wasn't a cry for help or a cry for attention. It was a sign of the emotional connection and deep meaning to what he was talking about. In this case, it was about the work. And I could see the ripple effects that it had on the team, who were all very energized around it. So if you've been sitting on your purpose or avoiding the question altogether, this might be a good week to dust it off and take one small step forward toward it. You don't need to have full clarity, just enough to start moving and taking the first step. Thank you, as always, for trying this out with me. And whether you're finding a roadblock in the definition phase, or you've maybe had some prompts that have worked for you personally that I didn't talk about, or whether you'd like a soundboard on how to align your work, and maybe like those companies, even all the way downstream to what kind of artificial intelligence investments that you want to make, hit us up. Whether it's on our social media DMs, we check Instagram and LinkedIn especially very often, or on our website at convergence.fm and the contact page, and we'd love to have a conversation around it. We will be back next week with another episode on fostering engaged teams who ship delightful products. We'll see you then. Thank you for joining me on the Convergence Podcast today. Subscribe to the Convergence Podcast on Apple Podcast, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your content. If you're listening and found this helpful, please give us a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube, hit that like button and tell me what you think about what you heard today.